In this video, I'm going to give my reactions to an interesting podcast that John Warner did with Scott Hanselman on the podcast there. I've had a chance to interact a little bit with John Warner on a past webinar that we did together with Brian Alexander, as well as a little bit on Twitter. So I don't always agree with John Warner, so that's an important part to start off with, but I think he's a very smart person with very interesting viewpoints. So I think that's a key thing that we really need to do with our understanding of ChatGPT and how it can be used in academia. So these are my reactions to what went on within this podcast, which I highly recommend to everyone. And I'll put a link in the description as well as right here. But it's very important for us to look at different viewpoints and think of it from different perspectives in order to see what can be done and how to implement AI to work as effectively as possible in different situations. So let's listen to what John Warner has to say a couple of times, and then I'll jump in with some different perspectives or ideas or reactions.
It's mostly around the kinds of writing, or as I argue in the book, non-writing, that the system incentivizes students to do. Highly prescriptive, highly programmatic, repetitive assignments, which the 5-paragraph essay, as I talk about in the book, is sort of the chief avatar of. It's more a symptom than a cause. But we're not allowing students the pleasure and interest in writing inside genuine rhetorical situations with audiences and purpose and a reason to write, other than to pass an assessment that somebody is going to grade for an AP test or that kind of thing. So we've cut off students from the aspects of learning to write that are interesting and pleasurable and will make us want to learn to write more, and replace them with what I call writing-related imitations, these assessment-driven experiences that really don't do much in terms of helping students learn to write. And I would ask students, how many of you learned something about your topic that changed your perception of it while you were writing? And the answer was almost zero. And this is actually something that should be constantly present in writing. It happens to me. I write a lot of different things for different places, and it happens every single time I write. In fact, if it doesn't happen, I'm suspicious about what I'm doing. Something's gone wrong.
This is a key point here, and what he's saying in a couple different ways is the importance of recognizing the power from the process, not just the end product. So I really like that, and I totally agree with that as well. So we're looking at, by going through and doing the writing, we're gaining an understanding, and we're also learning, because we have to understand what it is that we're writing about. And as we're writing, we're contemplating it. So I totally agree with this. So now if we take this back to ChatGPT, yeah, we don't want ChatGPT to do the writing for us, at least all the writing for us, because then we're not going to be able to learn from the process of doing it. Now, John, later on or throughout his presentation, he talks about, the importance of actually going through it all. I'm more sort of thinking about different ways that we can apply, because again, we can apply ChatGPT in different ways. We could use it for all the writing, which I'm not advocating for, or we could use it at different points. Maybe I want it to help me with some of this. Maybe I want it to give me a starting point. But again, with the notion that I'm still learning about it, I'm still learning something new. I need to know the topic in order to write about it properly. ChatGPT, again, could help me understand the topic. So I think it's a matter of balance, and it's a matter of ensuring that the student understands that, and ensuring that the student has reflection, constant reflection, to know what's going on in the process. Because again, just like John is saying, the process is key here. The process is vitally important, as opposed to just that end product.
Why can't all writing have some element of fun? There's no inherent reason why that can't be true.
I just want to make a quick comment here, right? Because he is championing something that I really push a lot, dealing with where I work at. I work as a director for the Center for Teaching and Learning at my university. And that's one of the key things that I always try to tell people is, hey, you want to avoid doing pure lecture all the time in your class. Why? Because the research shows that if it's pure lecture, it's going to become boring for the students. And once the student is bored, then they're going to lose interest. So the opposite of boring is fun. So if we can have fun, if we can have engagement, if we can have this motivational aspect in what's going on, then yeah, learning is going to happen because they're going to be focused. They're going to want to go through it. So the more that you can do to maximize the fun, as John is talking about there, the better it's going to be. So he talks about how we can teach writing, we can make it so that it's not just formulaic, but it's actually an interesting journey, a process that's fun. Then that's exactly what we should do. So my argument here, where I'm stepping in, is that ChatGPT can be a facilitator for fun, right? We can integrate its use, and it can be interesting in itself simply because it's a new technology. Now, I know there's going to be comments there already, right? I'm not talking about using technologies just for technology's sake. I'm talking about using what's available, what's interesting, what's new, again, controlled in the proper way, because you're the instructor, in a way to help facilitate this fun aspect, to help make it interesting. What would ChatGPT do in this instance? How would it answer here? Why is it wrong in saying this? Why are we not using ChatGPT? Well, we're going to be using it for this other assignment, so we're going to get ready for that by learning the skills mastery here. But again, having this interesting technology can be a component of fun. So I don't want you to not think about that as we go through this.
There's this concept called Campbell's Law that I think explains this well. And Campbell, he was a sociologist who studied schools and achievement. And it essentially says, once the indicator becomes the measurement is no longer worth anything. So where a measurement is measuring good underlying practices, it's useful. Once the measurement substitutes for itself, it's no longer useful. So if students producing a 5-paragraph essay is the subject of good writing processes and a well-organized essay and that kind of stuff, great. But once we say, oh, producing a 5-paragraph essay is the point, that corrupts the instruction.
I'm really glad that I listened to this podcast. There's lots of great content in there again, so I want to reiterate that you should definitely listen to the whole thing. But this was one of my favorite parts because before, when I've talked to John, or I've listened to John, he's very much against the 5-paragraph essay. He's always been negative towards it. And I didn't quite understand that because I use it plenty of times within my instruction, within my class. I teach writing. I used to teach a freshman seminar, and it was very effective. It was a very useful tool. But what John was saying in the past is exactly what this was, right? Where there was a full explanation for what he means when he's saying the 5-paragraph essay is he doesn't like it. Well, it's because if it's too structured and if it's done for just the purposes of you have to be able to create this and that's it, then that's wrong. But the way that I've always used it is that this is a tool, this is sort of a skeleton just to get you an understanding of where we want to go towards, but that's not the end all be all. There's so much different aspects about it. This is just a convenient way so that we can put something together that makes logical sense. So that's the way I've used it. It hasn't been a rigid structure, but just a framework. So John and I are in agreement with that, so that's great. And again, the idea here is that when we're teaching the writing, it's done in a way that it's not just formulaic. So this is a key part, and a great part, so I'm glad with that.
If the incentive is to score well on the assessment, students will do whatever it takes to score well on the assessment. And therefore, if cheating it becomes a rational decision, right? It's not academic dishonesty, because what we're signaling is whatever the score you get on this is what's most important. If I can use Cliff Notes or plagiarize or now ChatGPT, why wouldn't I do that? It's a horrible message to send to students. And my hope is now that ChatGPT can do these things in a matter of seconds, we'll re-examine what we ask students to do.
So this is an interesting part that John talks about. And again, I agree with him. And then I also have some slight differences there because again, I do think that it's important that we uphold academic integrity and that students have to learn these lessons. They have to understand that, there's going to be many instances, many times where you'll be able to cheat, you'll be able to circumvent things, but regardless of what the reason is, you're not supposed to do that because that's against policy, it's against the rules, and once they get out of the university, it'll probably be against the law for a lot of these things. So they have to learn these things. This is part of what we're teaching them within higher academia, is we're also teaching them to be good citizens, right? So these are some of the soft skills that come along with it, regardless of whether it's an assignment that they don't agree with or they don't have time for. Too bad, that's how the world works. So that's an important lesson in itself, I think. So that part needs to stay no matter what. But along with that, I also agree that we need to focus on the important things. We need to help them see that it's to their detriment to try to cheat. It's to their detriment. They're going to be losing out on so much because if they don't learn something here, they're not going to be able to learn it there. So part of our responsibility is to help them see that along the way. And the way that we formulate our assignments, the way that we create the pathway to that, say, the big essay, that's going to be important too. Because if it's nothing but, okay, here's the assignment, and then in a month you turn this in, and we don't talk in between, well, yeah, that's going to cause lots of reasons to cheat. So we want to avoid that. So we want to have different aspects of formative assessments throughout, where we have in-class discussions about this, where they create different parts of this. Maybe it's a paragraph at a time. Maybe it's an overall understanding of their outline, that we're reviewing their writing as it's going along. It's not just a one and done. It's not just about that product. It's about that process once again. Now again, I'm also looking at this with ChatGPT, meaning how can it be integrated? How can it be used to help, not to do the assignment for them, but as a functional tool, as an assistant. Maybe it can offer feedback at times, not to take you out of the equation, but to help them see how they can help themselves. And we'll talk a little bit more about ChatGPT being able to offer feedback, which again, he talks about it a little bit as well.
And you say in your book, Why They Can't Write, that giving students writing tasks that are synthesizing knowledge, which coincidentally is something that computers are supposed to be really good at, that they will go and struggle with those kinds of tasks. Those skills take a lot of practice. We don't really give them time to practice. We drop in somewhere in 7th or 8th grade and we say, 5 paragraphs, read this book and TLDR the entire book into a couple of paragraphs, but do it the way I want, with the words I want, with the transition words that I want. And you're saying, and your very popular Substack article says that ChatGPT really can't kill anything that's worth preserving. That's a pretty big statement for a person who teaches writing.
Well, so your audience knows this better than I do around the technology of ChatGPT, but it really is just a syntax assembling machine and a regurgitator of what's already in the world. It cannot create anything new, certainly not intentionally. I've had some fun with it, mixing around prompts and building on prompts and that kind of stuff, but that's me, sort of the writer and human intelligence using it as a tool. By itself, it can't do any of these things. And it certainly can't, when reading a book like To Kill a Mockingbird or The House on Mango Street, it cannot have a response to that. It has no independent emotional or experience of that book. And if we can, when I would teach literature, I would start there. We don't want to just say, oh, it's a good book or it's a bad book. It's like, what does this book do to you as a human being? How does it move you? What is its meaning in the world? What is its meaning in your life? That's where we start. And then we'll find something to write about, as opposed to thinking there is one answer or a narrow slice of answers that are acceptable about this book that we have to program into you because that's what the assessment wants, and which is how, unfortunately, much of the AP advanced placement curriculum works. It's just not how it is in the world. I grew up loving reading because I got to create meaning out of the world of the books I read and the life I experienced. And that we're cutting students off from that in the name of education is sort of the greatest irony I can possibly imagine.
So I really like the way that John phrases things and the way that he explains things. And again, I agree with most of what he says. Some of the things I think I'm maybe viewing it in the same way, but from a different perspective. So there's a slight difference, or maybe I'm looking at something in a different aspect of it. So he talks about how, well, it's only predicting text and it's not creating anything. I think I would have to disagree with that because I've had it create things from scratch. I give it a few prompts and it will create something new for me. Now, we have to sort of have an operational definition of what we mean by that, because it is predicting words, but it's still something new. I've taken I asked it to create a short story for me. It did. And I took that and I went and I checked all plagiarism checkers that I could find. I did internet searches. I did journal searches. And guess what? It was totally new. It wasn't plagiarized. It was a new creation. So we have to kind of, okay, what do we mean by creation? But again, I would have to argue that it's something that was completely new. Now, he also talks about, well, that was me using it as a tool. Exactly. That's my biggest point, is that ChatGPT is a tool, and it won't function perfectly or well if I am brand new and just pose it a question and that's it. But if I'm properly trained, meaning if I'm an instructor and I know how to use it, and now I'm also teaching my students proper AI literacy and helping them to become better users of this technology, then they will be enhanced as well as far as how to use it to their benefit. So, the popular term now is prompt engineer, and that just means that you can ask it the right questions in the right way, and then continue to ask it questions, continue to prompt it, continue to edit the responses so that you are part of this creation. It's not just, here it is, and it's giving this end result. In that last part there, he talks about how we don't want the student to simply pose a question and then, hey, here's the absolute result that it comes up with. Well, exactly. I'm not arguing for that either. It should be where I can pose it a question and it's giving me information, and there's an example. There is a possibility for me to interpret, for me to decide, for me to look at, critically think about. Again, that's part of good AI literacy that they should be learning right now from their instructors about, oh, here's a possible answer. It's not the end all be all. It's just this observation. But now if I pose a question, or if I pose it a different question to begin with from a slightly different angle, then it's going to give me new information. So I need to be able to think about it so I can use it to my advantage. Because now being able to ask someone else different questions, a buddy, a friend, that's part of how we learn as well. So being able to have a conversation with ChatGPT is going to be able to help us learn in many different ways. In the same way, when we're going through, and I'm going through an assignment, I'm trying to learn the synthesis aspect or a summary aspect of how to write a good essay, I can pose it questions. I can ask it about the novel itself, not to give me all the answers, but to have different perspectives, different angles. What about this? What does this mean? Can you interpret this for me? Okay, now I have your interpretation. I can use that against my interpretation. We can see where there's agreement. We can see where there's differences. It can cause me to think in a different way as well. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. That may be the slight difference in that John is talking about the student needs to be able to do all that on their own, completely by themselves. I disagree right there in that part. I can see the power of that, but in the reality of, let's say, their jobs or their workforce, you're always going to other people and asking them questions. The fact that we now have ChatGPT as a tool that can help us with that is just an extension of capabilities that we need to continually develop. So again, I agree and disagree. So again, good interaction here with John. So let's see what else he's got.
And putting the perspective of what ChatGPT can and can't do through the lens of some of the things that you talk about in your book, you talk about the primary dimensions of a practice. You talk about knowledge and skills, which I think we can agree ChatGPT at least pretends to have. But then you talk about habits, how things think, and then attitudes, which ChatGPT arguably can't have. So the stuff that we're teaching, take this book, know it, think about it, and then spit it out. That's definitely a computery type thing. But its attitudes and its habits are really limited or even biased by the material that it's trained on. So it could create some pretty problematic essays, but have no opinion about whether it's bad or good. And we have to then count on humans to filter that out or make sure that the model doesn't say things that it shouldn't be saying.
One of the interesting phenomenon around the rise of this, and in a lot of ways I feel ahead of some of my colleagues who teach writing and think about these things, in that I was experimenting and looking at previous versions. I looked at GPT-2 and was frankly quite unimpressed and thought this stuff is years away from being as good as it is now. So that'll show me. But the attitudes and habits of mind of writers is where writers live. And embodying a practice is how we go through life. Something like, for your audience, computer programming is not merely a matter of skills and knowledge. There are also attitudes and habits of mind that make you a good programmer. I have a good friend where I live in Charleston, South Carolina, who's in his late 70s, but made his living as a computer programmer before you could even compile your programs. He had to handwrite his programs, and he would have to think them through. And he's now older. He's like, one of the big problems with programmers today is they don't have to think about their programs before they test if they're going to work. But he's talking about a habit of mind, right, and an attitude. And these are things that can evolve over time, and we get tools that help us with that and that kind of thing. But if we don't also help students build those capacities, and these are capacities that obviously extend beyond just writing, right? It's sort of like life 101 in a lot of ways. Why are they in school? This is another thing I say in the book, is that life is to be lived, including between the ages of 5 and 22. And so the notion that school is not life never made sense to me. School is simply the life you live when you're 5 to 22, if you're going to go all the way through college. Why not also think of school in those contexts, particularly when we can have students learn while embracing that kind of attitude? There's no divide between learning things and also recognizing that school can be like life.
Lots of great stuff brought up by both John and Scott. This idea of it being able to give you information but not even properly thinking about it, and possible biases that might come up. 100% true. This is a key aspect that we always have to keep in mind when interacting with AI, even into the future, because again, it's going to give us a perspective. Just like we have tons of subject matter experts right now that give us their perspective. So to think that there's only going to be one correct or this is the perfect answer, I don't buy that. We need to be looking at, okay, this sounds like a good answer. Let me hear a different argument. Let me get that. And now let's use critical thinking to evaluate these things based off of the situation, based off of the different perspectives. So that's a key thing. And again, this ties back to AI literacy, which is what we need to be teaching students. We need to be ensuring that they're understanding that, hey, just because this comes from an AI, no matter what GPT version it is, GPT-4, GPT-5, who cares? We always still have to have this proper attitude like John was talking about, and really be thinking about things all the way through. So we need to have a critical analysis. We need to be ensuring that we understand what are the sources of information, are there biases, are there guardrails that are put in. ChatGPT right now is notorious for its guardrails, right? In order to prevent anyone from getting offended, it's got special guardrails, but that in itself is interjecting some bias. So we have to keep that in mind. I also totally agree with John that, hey, a student that is going to school, they're not just there to prepare for life. This is life. This is a big part of people's lives. So that's definitely true. I definitely think that their lives are going to be using a lot of AI. So it's important for us to help them start to work with it right now, because it is part of their life right now in school. They're exposed to it everywhere else. They're going to be exposed to it in school. They need to be able to properly use it and harness it throughout their lives as well.
Mostly what we signal to students is there is some indefinite future payoff to what you're doing now. Can't tell you when, can't tell you what, but it'll be there. Just trust us.
Yeah, and we all know how humans do great about indefinite future payoffs.
So that was just a quick little blurb. There's a longer discussion that those two had. But I really wanted to make mention of this because, again, I totally am in agreement with John here in that, wow, it's so important to ensure that the student knows the relevancy about why things are going on. Why are we doing this? That relevancy is a key factor in motivation. So if you want your students to be motivated, they need to know the relevancy. If you want to demotivate them, don't tell them why, or give them some abstract notion about, oh, you just need this for the test. That's not enough. It needs to be as personalized as possible, as specific as possible for them to really have an understanding, to really see the relevancy of why they're doing this. So that's something for all of us to really work on, no matter what it is that we're teaching, whether it's writing, whether it's any type of topic. It really needs to be important. They need to see it. So you need to provide them timely examples, timely ways that they can actually apply this information, apply what they're learning, to see that this is a skill that is really needed and it's really going to be relevant to them. It's going to be helpful and useful for them.
The third group, which is what I identify with, is that writing is still writing. This thing does exist in the world, and we should help students understand it as a tool or perhaps a toy or something in between that can and will be useful to them. But the more they know about writing, the better their skills, knowledge, attitudes, and habits of mind, the more secure and rounded the writer's practice, the more useful this tool will be to them.
So this is probably my favorite quote from his whole podcast here, in that although John knocks ChatGPT a bit every once in a while, he comes back to it here, and he's definitely realizes that this is a new reality that we have, and that it is a tool. See how he had to jab it by saying maybe a toy, right? It's definitely a tool that's going to continue to get better and better and better. So it is definitely a tool. Students need to know how to use it. Students need to know how to harness its power for their own benefit. But I totally agree with John here in that he talks about how, hey, if you want to be able to use this tool effectively, if you want to be able to really harness its power, well, then you need to be a subject matter expert to begin with in the topic of your field, as well as in how to actually write. How are you going to know if what ChatGPT gives you is written well if you don't know how to write, right? So you need to have this basic skills mastery. You need to develop this attitude of a writer. You need to have this purpose of mind like he's talking about. You need to know what right looks like in order to be able to effectively use that tool. So students definitely need to have this understanding. They need to develop that fundamental skills mastery in order to use this as effectively as possible. So totally agree with John for sure.
Trying to police this is futile. The AI will always stay one step ahead of the detectors. Teachers spending all their time trying to figure out if a student has used it is a waste of time that could be spent doing something else. It's just not what we should be doing. Unfortunately, this seems to be what a lot of kind of the big administrative responses are at this stage.
Agreed. This is an important aspect to understand, is that there's going to be these detectors, they're going to continue to improve, but ChatGPT and these other AI text generating tools will continue to improve as well. So it is going to be a cat and mouse game. I have another video that breaks it down even more. And the thing is that it's not that difficult to circumvent these detectors if you put a little bit more effort into it. So that's a thing to really understand. Now, John didn't mention this, but I'm not sure what his viewpoint is on this, but I definitely want to state that I still think it's important to have detectors. I still think it's important for us to utilize them as far as making sure that students understand, hey, this type of software does exist. This could be used if needed, right? Because again, we're telling the students that we value academic integrity, that it's important to us. So if they are cheating, if they are using tools that they're not supposed to in the class, because again, the instructor tells them specifically not to use it for this assignment and the reasons why they're not supposed to use it for this assignment, because they're developing skills mastery at a certain level, and that maybe AI will be used at a later assignment. So if they're not following the proper direction of the instructor and they're cheating, they're using software resources that they're not supposed to, then they need to know that there will be consequences, that we will be checking for this type of thing, so they will be held accountable. Now, the best way to sort of avoid these type of situations is, one, to ensure that they know when they're allowed to use these type of tools and when they're not to, and also to know your student. Now, that's easier for some classes than for others, right? Because I know some of you teach huge classes, but to know your student more, meaning that I know how my student writes and at what level they're at. So if all of a sudden they turn in something that's magically way better, then there's probably an issue. Maybe I need to approach the student and ask them about what process that they use. Along with that, the more that we know our student, the more that we're engaging with our student, meaning that, again, it's not just this product at the end, but it's that writing process. So that's where they're really learning. So that's why we need to have these formative assessments. We need to have these discussions in class. We need to have different skills that they're applying in class so that we can see their development. It's a process.
These tools have really made a big difference to me. And I love spell check because I'm kind of a lousy speller. grammar check can be handy when you are following up behind it to make sure it's not doing something bad to your voice or your message. The predictive texts, and this is now happening, for some reason, the Microsoft Word version that I have on my iPad is always predicting texts. I do not know how to turn it off. It drives me crazy, partly because it's right about 60% of the time, but also because even when it's not right, I'm still tempted to follow it. And I think this is a problem. The underlying part of your question is, I think, making sure that we re-examine and look at the underlying values that we associate with good work or quality work. And one of the things, I don't know if this is true of programming, but I suspect it may be true because it's writing, it's language, right? Is efficiency and speed are not necessarily a virtue when it comes to quality and writing. Now, it may be in certain contexts, there may be good reasons for emphasizing speed and efficiency, but they certainly are not associated with learning. Speed and efficiency, in fact, I think are anti-correlated with learning. And so when we have these tools that try to speed us along, I think that's a problem. Another issue that's going to arise with ChatGPT already that I'm trying to fight against before it gets too far is using ChatGPT as a feedback machine for student writing, because it gives instant feedback. There's no benefit to instant feedback on writing. In fact, one of the best things any writer can do is to write something, go walk the dog or take a nap, and come back to it and look at it fresh when you've sort of, I don't know if this is going to be accurate for a programming crowd, but I think of it as like, I need to clear the cache of my brain, look at what I've done before.
Yeah.
So here is where we get into maybe some slight minutia, some differences as far as perspective and views on some of this. So I agree, again, with John as far as this effectiveness and speed aspect, in that learning can be sort of hampered with some of that. I can definitely agree with that on some levels, for sure. At the same time, that's the reality of what we have, right? Is that our students want that. They want to be able to do more things and to be able to do it faster and effectively. So that's for sure. We as instructors want to be effective and want to be able to accomplish things quickly. So everybody is working towards that, right? And in the business industry, once somebody gets employed, that's a major factor. So they need to learn those things. They need to learn, how can I be faster at what I do? How can I be more effective at what I do? That in itself is a skill. So if ChatGPT can help to accomplish that, well, it's kind of important for us to learn that. Again, I think we're talking about different things here, right? Because he's talking about the importance of the learning process, which I 100% agree with. But again, I'm looking at things on a slightly different scale or different level. So I think we're both right on this. Now, the other part here, as far as understanding its use for feedback, I agree. I agree that we shouldn't eliminate this aspect of the feedback. But again, feedback when, feedback where, feedback how. If we're talking about I'm writing and I'm creating a concept and I've created my first draft and now I'm thinking about restructuring it, okay, yeah, I would agree that we should think about our writing, maybe sleep on it if we have the time, go for a walk, and then go back at it and try it. Perfect. So now I've allowed myself to think about it, to go through the process of it. Well, now I need feedback, right? One of the 7 steps of the writing process is that we get feedback. But where are we going to get that feedback from? Well, if it's part of the process, I can turn my draft in and I'll get feedback from my instructor. Great. If it's not part of that process and I need feedback, where am I going to get it? Hopefully from a peer, maybe, if I have that peer available. But like most students, they're probably finishing this up at midnight or later, and they need feedback. Well, where are they going to get it? That's right, ChatGPT can offer that. So it's a tool that can be used, and it offers some really good feedback, different types of feedback, again, depending on what type of feedback you're asking it for. And the way that you prompt it, it'll give you all sorts of different types of feedback. But again, I agree with John in that it needs to be used in the right way at the right time. So that is, again, this aspect of how are we using the tool? Because I agree that it can be used improperly, or it can use properly to help with the learning process, to help with this overall understanding, to help that student be more effective and to be faster in learning. So again, we're kind of saying the same things, but looking at it in a slightly different way.
Like sound writing instruction should emphasize relationships between writing and technologies. So it seems like incorporating this as a tool, just like Grammarly, just like spell check, is important. It's just when the students think that it's a shortcut, when everything in life is a shortcut. Right?
It has to be purposeful, right? We have to be in charge of the tool. We don't just like have automatic hammers that leap out of our toolbox and start running around our house, hitting any nail that's sticking out of the wall.
Yeah.
This is a thing that sort of drives me bonkers about AI and this kind of stuff, the worries about AI. And you would know better than me about why this is the case, but I'm sort of like, aren't we in charge? Aren't we the humans? Like, do we not have agency over these things ultimately? Could we not choose otherwise?
100% agree. Yes, we have to maintain this idea of we're in charge, and that it's not, it is, I do think it is going to be somewhat of a shortcut because it's going to make us more effective and faster, which again is on one viewpoint he was against, right? But again, how are we looking at this shortcut? I'm looking at it as this is going to be a tool that I can use to be more effective in doing this, to make this a better end product. But in order for me to even do that, I have to have those fundamentals. I have to know about the writing process. I have to be a good writer in order to use this tool effectively, to use it properly. So I'm totally in agreement with him. It shouldn't be this automatic thing that, oh, it's just doing it for me, and now I have no part in the process. Hey, write this for me, I take it, and then I turn it in. No, that's never going to be right. It needs to be a process of, okay, here I'm prompt engineering and I'm giving it these different aspects and I'm thinking about what it is that I really want. It's giving me a response. I'm looking at it. I'm prompting it again, making modifications, editing, going through this overall process because I know the proper result of what I'm really looking for. And then from that, we're working together as a tool. It's a conversation, it's a process in order to get the best final result. So again, it should not be a simple automatic process. It should be an enhanced union to go through and to get that final creation.
I have a line in my novel that I published and is out of print called The Funny Man, where it was a little Easter egg I put in there for myself. And it says, everyone has a story and the best ones are the ones we tell ourselves. Because that was my experience of writing. I put it in there before I knew the novel was going to be published because I wanted to affirm the fact that I had spent 8 years writing this thing, that it was worth doing. And that's what your son is experiencing. To outsource part of the pleasure doesn't really make sense. To use it as a tool that might get over a hump, that's fine. And there's programs like that. There's one called Pseudo-Write that I know a lot of folks use that kind of sketch things out that they fill in. And that's all well and good. It's not of interest to me. But I think in good hands, those are perfectly useful in the same way. A good programmer can use tools that help compile and check syntax and that kind of thing.
There's a couple of interesting things that he says there. To deny the pleasure of writing, right? So, and we talked a little bit on Twitter about this as well. He used some interesting, colorful language in describing that as well. But the thing to think about here, and I agree that it needs to be a tool used in the proper way. And I like to write. I love writing, especially if I write a short story or it's a fictional writing. In addition to that, I do a lot of other writing. I do a lot of reports. I'm a director for research and analysis, so I have to do all sorts of different writings, right? And in doing that writing, some of that is not as pleasurable as I would like. So there are different types of writing. John focuses a lot on I think he focuses, again, I don't want to speak for him, but he focuses a lot on this pleasurable aspect of writing. But my argument would be that there's lots of writing that occurs that people have to do that isn't necessarily pleasurable. It's a work, it's a process. So if we can use a tool to help us navigate through that, to be faster and to be able to accomplish it better and easier, then we should be using it. But again, with this understanding that it's a tool, it's not something that will simply do it for us, because we still have to be the ones with agency. We still have to be the ones in control. So that means we have to know what right looks like. We have to be able to critically analyze and decide this is okay, to again have that conversation, to edit, to enhance, to make it that good creation. So a proper tool used in the proper way.
I stopped calling everything an assignment. I didn't assign essays. I give writing experiences. And then I assess and grade those experiences according to the totality of the experience, involving students in that assessment, reflecting on what they've learned and what they've experienced. And I can testify from teaching this and now the book having been out in the world for a few years and other people teaching it, it really does work. Students can get involved. And as we speak, I'm working on a course to help a digital, self-paced continuing ed course for teachers to help think through these problems and for themselves decide what kinds of experiences help my students learn in writing contexts. What kind of processes do I want them to do so we can get away from all this stuff? This is why in that article on Substack, I kept saying, this is an opportunity. We might not take it, but this is an opportunity to examine the things we ask students to do and really see if those are the things they should be doing if our goal is helping students learn to write.
Again, I have to say that I love the way that John talks. It's very eloquent. It's as if he's written it, so it's very nice. I 100% agree with what he's talking about, and I love this idea of changing sort of the marketing aspect in the classroom, right? So you're not doing an assignment, you're going through this writing experience. So it's not you have to do, it's you get to do. And I love that. I think that's exactly what it needs to be. When I used to teach another course where I taught instructors how to be better instructors, right? It was a developmental type of class. And that's one of the big things that I would push for as well, is that the class itself shouldn't just be this idea of they're coming there and they're going to get information. We're way past that. We're in the information age, right? There's information everywhere. They don't need you as this instructor just to get information. They need you for an understanding of things, to get better knowledge acquisition, to get better explanations, and to give them a better educational experience. That's exactly what John is talking about. That's what we're trying to, I think both of us agree that this is the important part of it, is that the class itself should be an educational process. It's not just about that end product. The end product is always going to be important. I think it's going to be important because when they get a job, they have to create a good end product. But that process, that's where the learning is occurring. Those formative assessments, that's where they gain an understanding of how to develop to be able to create that final thing, to pass that final exam, or to be able to properly display these new skills that they've learned from that class. So that's important, is that the overall process is the key, which is part of this overall learning experience. So again, great podcast. Recommend that everybody listen to it. It was a real pleasure to listen to it, and I hope you enjoyed this response. And remember, learning is for life.